The smell is what I remember first, not the rot. You get used to that inside a week. It's the absence of everything else. No cut grass, no diesel fumes, no coffee drifting out of a kitchen window at 6 in the morning. The world used to smell like people. Now it smells like rain on concrete, wet earth, and something underneath both that you learn not to name. I'd been walking for 11 days when I saw the sign for Hargrove. 11 days since the refinery camp outside Wheeling fell apart. 11 days since I watched 200 people turn on each other over a shipping container of canned pears. I didn't fight over the pears. I took a half-empty bottle of water purification tablets from a dead man's jacket pocket while everyone else was screaming. And I walked east, and I didn't look back. And I tried not to think about the sound a skull makes when it hits a concrete floor at the wrong angle. That was day 1. By day 11, my boots had split along the left sole. My right knee had swollen to the size of a grapefruit from sleeping on frozen ground. And I'd eaten nothing in 31 hours, except a palmful of raw acorns that tasted like wet chalk and shame. Then I saw the sign. Hargrove. 4 miles Hargrove. Where I grew up. Where my mother still lived when the broadcasts stopped. Where my younger sister Donna had moved back with her son after her divorce. Where I hadn't been in 14 months because I'd been 800 miles west when the infrastructure collapsed. And every route home turned into a corridor of the dead and the dying. I stood at that road sign for a long time. Long enough that the light changed. Long enough that the wind shifted and carried something from the south. A faint, sweet decay that made the skin on my forearms prickle. You develop a sense for it. Not a sixth sense, nothing supernatural. Just your animal brain doing what it was always designed to do before we buried it under mortgage payments and notification sounds. Something dead was nearby, something that might not be staying dead. I left the road, pushed through the brittle remains of a soybean field, stalks snapping against my shins, keeping low and watching the tree line. The infected don't tend to wander open fields during daylight. They cluster in structures, houses, overpasses, drainage culverts. Anywhere echo carries. They seem drawn to the memory of enclosure, as if part of whatever's left of their brain still wants walls and a roof. But the rules only hold until they don't. I'd seen a woman in a sundress standing in the middle of an empty highway outside Zanesville at high noon, perfectly still, head tilted back like she was trying to catch rain that wasn't falling. She didn't move when I passed. She didn't move when I was 100 yards past her. She moved when I stepped on a piece of broken glass, and the sound cracked the silence like a branch. I didn't look back then either. Hargrove had been a small town. 2 traffic lights, a Family Dollar, a diner called Reba's that served breakfast until 2 in the afternoon, and was the only place in town that made decent pie. Population maybe 3,000 before the collapse. And I figured by now it would be down to dozens, or 0. I didn't expect to find anyone alive. I want to be clear about that. I'd stopped expecting to find anyone alive approximately 9 days earlier, when I'd come across a farmhouse in eastern Ohio where someone had written, "Please help us," on a bedsheet and hung it from the second-floor window. I'd gone in because I still believed in the words. I found what the infected had left behind in the upstairs bathroom. And the details aren't something I'll share, but they're something I carry. And they're the reason I stopped climbing stairs after that. I wasn't going to Hargrove to find my family. I was going to Hargrove to stand in the house where I grew up and say goodbye to people who were probably already gone. I wanted to close the door. I wanted to stop imagining. Imagination is the worst part. Worse than the hunger, worse than the cold, worse than the infected themselves. Because the infected are just bodies doing what the virus tells them to do. They're mechanical, predictable, mostly. But your imagination, it runs every scenario. It shows you your mother's face in every corpse. It puts your nephew's voice in every distant cry. I needed to see the truth, whatever it was, so my mind could finally stop generating alternatives. 4 miles, 2 hours at my pace with the bad knee. I started walking. The outskirts of Hargrove looked like every other small town I'd passed through, like someone had pressed pause on a Tuesday afternoon and then let weather and gravity do the editing. Cars sat where they'd been parked or abandoned, tires flat, windshields fogged from the inside with mold. Lawns had grown knee-high and then died back in the cold, leaving a matted brown carpet over every yard. A child's bicycle lay on its side in a driveway. The chrome handlebars rusted to the color of dried blood. I came in from the east, through the neighborhood behind the elementary school. The school itself was dark, and the front doors stood open. Not a good sign. Open doors mean either the living left in a hurry, or the infected found a way inside and never found a reason to leave. I gave it a wide berth. The first body I found was in the intersection of Maple and 3rd, not infected, actually dead. A man, maybe 60, lying on his back next to an overturned shopping cart. He'd been there a long time. The cold had slowed decomposition, but hadn't stopped it. Animals had been at him. I didn't recognize him, but that didn't mean anything. 14 months is a long time, and death rearranges faces in ways that make identification a guess. I searched his pockets. Nothing useful. A wallet with a driver's license. Gerald Pruitt, born 1966. I didn't know the name. I left the wallet on his chest because it felt wrong to take a dead man's identity, even if I left everything else. 3 blocks further, I found the first infected. It was inside a ranch house on Sycamore, visible through the living room window, standing in the middle of the room, facing the wall, not moving. The curtains were half drawn, and the late afternoon light came through in a bar that cut across its torso. A man, tall, wearing a mechanic's coverall with the name Terry stitched above the left pocket. His skin had the telltale marbling, gray-blue with dark veins visible beneath like road maps drawn by a shaking hand. He wasn't moving, and that was the most dangerous state. People think the running ones are the worst. They're not. The still ones are the worst because you don't know what triggers them. Sound, usually. Vibration sometimes. I'd heard someone at the wheeling camp claim it was body heat. But I'd walked within 10 feet of still ones in the cold and not drawn a reaction. Nobody really knows the rules. We just have guesses with varying survival rates. I crossed to the other side of the street and kept moving. 2 more houses down, another one. This time visible through a screened door, sitting on a kitchen floor. A woman in a housecoat. Her jaw was working slowly, open and closed, like she was chewing something that wasn't there. The density worried me. 2 in 2 blocks meant the town hadn't been cleared. No military sweep, no survivor militia, no organized effort. Hargrove had been left to itself. And whatever had happened here had happened the way it happened everywhere. Quickly, and then slowly, and then not at all. My mother's house was on the west side of town, another mile maybe. I kept to the middle of the street where I could see in all directions and placed each step carefully, avoiding broken glass, fallen branches, anything that might generate sound. At the corner of Sycamore and Main, I stopped. Main Street was where Hargrove kept its dignity. The post office, the hardware store, Reba's diner, the little insurance agency where my mother had worked for 22 years. And there, halfway down the block, was the bus stop, the 14 line. It had connected Hargrove to the county seat, running 4 times a day. They'd closed it 3 years before the outbreak due to budget cuts. The county had pulled the bench, but left the sign, a rusted pole with a faded blue placard that read, HCTS Bus Stop 14. Service discontinued. I almost didn't look. I was focused on the route to my mother's house, mentally mapping which streets to avoid based on what I'd already seen. But something made me look. A flicker of color in a town that had become entirely brown and gray. There were 3 people sitting at the bus stop. They'd brought their own chairs, 2 folding lawn chairs and a wooden kitchen chair, and arranged them in a neat row beneath the sign, as if waiting for a bus that would never come. A woman in a heavy winter coat, her gray hair pulled back. A younger woman in a green parka, her arm around a small boy bundled in a too large jacket, the sleeves rolled up past his wrists. My legs stopped working. The woman in the winter coat was my mother. The younger woman was Dana. The boy was Eli, Dana's son, who had been 4 years old the last time I saw him, and who was now. My brain did the math, and then refused the answer, then did it again. 5. Almost 6. They were alive. They were sitting at a closed bus stop in the middle of a dead town, and they were alive. I didn't call out. I didn't run toward them. I stood at the corner of Main Street with my hand on the brick wall of the hardware store and waited for the image to dissolve, because I'd hallucinated before. Day 6, outside Cambridge, I'd seen my college roommate sitting on a guardrail eating an apple. He'd waved at me. I'd waved back. When I got close, there was nothing there. Just a fire hydrant with a red reflector that the light had caught at the right angle. But my mother didn't dissolve. She shifted in her lawn chair. She reached over and adjusted the collar of Eli's jacket. Dana said something I couldn't hear, and my mother answered, and Eli kicked his legs the way children do when chairs are too tall. I stepped into the street. Dana saw me first. She went rigid, and her arm tightened around Eli, and I could see even from 50 yards that her body shifted into the posture I'd seen in every survivor I'd ever encountered. The coiled readiness to either fight or flee. Then my mother turned, and she squinted, and she raised one hand to shade her eyes, even though the sun was behind her. "Mom," I said, not loudly, just enough. The word traveled down Main Street like it had been waiting to. My mother stood up. The lawn chair nearly tipped behind her. She didn't run. She wasn't built for running, even before the world ended. With her bad hip and her stubborn refusal to use the cane the doctor had prescribed, she walked toward me with her hand still raised, as if she needed to hold the image of me in place. We met in the middle of the street. She put both hands on my face, the way she used to when I was small, and she wanted my full attention. Her fingers were cold. Her eyes were wet. She smelled like wood smoke and something herbal. Rosemary, maybe. "You're real," she said. "I'm real. You're thin. I know." She pulled me down into a hug, and I felt 17 years of being an adult collapse in my chest. And for about 4 seconds, I wasn't a survivor. I wasn't a scavenger. I wasn't someone who had walked 11 days through the ruins of civilization. I was Margaret Calloway's son, and I was home. Then Dana was there, and she was harder to read because Dana had always been harder to read. She didn't hug me. She stood 3 feet away with Eli half hidden behind her legs and studied me the way she studied everything. Carefully, looking for the flaw, the angle, the thing you weren't saying. "You walked," she said. Not a question. "From Wheeling. That's over 100 miles. 160. I didn't take the direct route. Eli peered around Dana's knee. He had Dana's dark hair and his father's square jaw. And his eyes were enormous, the way children's eyes get when they've seen too much of the wrong things too early. "Are you Uncle Marcus?" he asked. The fact that he had to ask told me everything about how long I'd been gone. When I left, Eli had been 4, and I'd been the uncle who let him ride on my shoulders and sneak cookies before dinner. Now I was a stranger with a beard and split boots and clothes that smelled like 11 days of unwashed road. "Yeah, buddy, I'm Uncle Marcus." He didn't come closer, and I didn't push it. Kids in this world have earned their caution. "We need to move," Dana said. "We've been sitting out here too long." "Why were you sitting out here at all?" I asked. My mother and Dana exchanged a look. It was a quick look, but I caught it. The kind of look that means we'll explain later, which in my experience usually means the explanation is going to be something I don't want to hear. "We sit here every afternoon," my mother said, "between 3 and 5, in case someone comes." "In case someone comes," I repeated. "In case you came," Dana said. Her voice had an edge. "She made us start doing it 3 months ago. Said she had a feeling." My mother didn't defend herself. She just started walking west toward the house. "Come on, we have soup." My mother's house looked the same and didn't look the same. The structure was intact. The pale yellow siding, the black shutters, the covered porch where my father used to sit in the evenings before the cancer took him. But the windows on the ground floor had been boarded from the inside with what looked like shelving from the hardware store. And the front door had 3 separate locking mechanisms that Dana operated in sequence. The garden was gone, replaced by raised beds of winter vegetables covered in plastic sheeting. And the perimeter of the yard had been lined with a low barrier of stacked tires filled with gravel. Not high enough to stop anything determined, but enough to slow an approach and create noise. "Dana's work," my mother said, nodding at the barrier as we crossed the yard. "I had time," Dana said. Inside, the house had been reorganized around survival. The living room was now storage. Shelves of canned goods, jugs of water, a wood stove that hadn't been there before, vented through a hole cut in the wall where the window used to be. The furniture had been pushed to the margins. My father's recliner was still in the corner, and the sight of it hit me harder than I expected. The kitchen was functional. A camp stove on the counter beside the regular stove, which I assumed no longer worked. Buckets of water lined against the wall. A hand-crank radio sat on the kitchen table next to a kerosene lamp and a stack of children's books. Dana heated soup. Actual soup, with vegetables and some kind of dried meat that I didn't ask about because hunger has its own ethics. Eli sat at the table drawing on the back of old envelopes with a pencil stub. My mother sat across from me and watched me eat with the focused attention of someone who has been waiting a very long time to perform an act of care. "The town," I said between spoonfuls. "How many are left? Living?" Dana leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Us. The Harpers on Birch Street, Frank and his daughter Nola. They keep to themselves. There's a man living in the feed store who showed up about 2 months ago. Doesn't talk, doesn't bother us. And there was a group of 3 who came through last month on their way to Pittsburgh. They didn't stay. That's it? That we know of. The east side is overrun. Probably 40 or 50 infected in the houses between the school and the creek. They don't cross Main Street much. Something about the open space keeps them on that side. But at night, they wander more." "How are you doing for supplies?" Dana gave me a look that said, "Don't manage me." "We're fine. Mom had a full pantry when it started, and we've been supplementing from the houses on this side. Most people left early, so there was a lot left behind. Water's the main problem. The well pump needs electricity, so we've been collecting rain and boiling creek water when we have to. The creek runs through the east side. I know where the creek runs, Marcus. I grew up here too. There it was. The edge. Donna and I had never had an easy relationship. She was 5 years younger and had spent most of her life convinced I was the favored child. The one who left for college, got the degree, moved to the city, came back for holidays with stories about a life she didn't have access to. When she got married at 22, I'd had doubts about Kevin. When the marriage ended 3 years later, I hadn't said I told you so. But Dana could hear unspoken sentences better than most people hear spoken ones. Now we were in a survival situation. And she'd been here for the hard part while I'd been 800 miles away. The power dynamic had inverted completely, and we both knew it. "I'm not trying to take over," I said. "Good, because I've kept us alive for 14 months without your help." My mother put her hand on the table between us. "He just got here, Dana." "I know he just got here. That's my point." Eli looked up from his drawing. He'd drawn a house with what appeared to be a very tall fence around it, and a sun that took up a quarter of the page. Normal things, kid things. Except there were figures outside the fence, and they were drawn in a different posture than the figures inside. Arms out, mouths open, rendered with the casual accuracy of a child who draws what he sees. "Are you staying?" Eli asked me. "Yeah," I said, before thinking about whether it was true. "I'm staying." Dana said nothing. She turned back to the stove and stirred the pot, and the sound of the spoon against the metal was the only noise in the kitchen for a long time. That night, my mother gave me the couch in the living room, and I lay under 2 quilts, listening to the house settle, and the wind move through the boards on the windows. Somewhere in the distance, east side probably, something screamed. Not a human scream, not exactly. The infected make a sound when they're agitated that sits in the uncanny valley between a shout and a cry. It has no words, but it carries something that used to be language. And that's what makes it hard to hear. Eli's room was directly above me. I heard him whimper, then heard Dana's voice, low and steady, saying something I couldn't make out. Then silence. I stared at the ceiling and thought about the bus stop. 3 chairs, arranged neatly, every afternoon, 3 to 5. My mother sitting in the cold, watching an empty road, waiting for someone to appear on it. The stubbornness of it, the faith. What if I hadn't come from the east? What if I'd approached from the highway instead? I would have gone straight to the house and never known they sat there every day. I would have found the house empty and drawn the wrong conclusion. I'd have kept walking. The thought made my stomach clench harder than the hunger had. Morning came gray and wet. I woke to the sound of rain on the boards and the smell of something cooking. Oatmeal, I realized. Actual oatmeal. Which meant they had supplies I hadn't expected. I found my mother in the kitchen already dressed, moving with the deliberate economy of someone who's adapted to limited resources. Every motion had purpose. No wasted water, no wasted heat, no wasted time. She'd been an office worker her entire adult life. A woman who paid someone else to fix the gutters and change the oil. Now, she moved like a homesteader. "How's your knee?" she asked, without turning around. "Noticed that, did you? You were listing left when you walked yesterday. Your father had the same knee. Same walk when it acted up." She set a bowl of oatmeal in front of me. It had raisins in it. The raisins almost broke me. Such a small thing. Such an ordinary, pre-collapse, Tuesday morning thing. "Mom, I need to ask about the bus stop." She sat down across from me with her own bowl. "I know you do. It's not safe. sitting exposed like that every day. It's Main Street, open sight lines. We can see anything coming from either direction. The infected don't come to Main Street during the day. Dana's tracked their patterns. They stay east. The only time we've had trouble on this side was at night, and that was once, back in August. I wanted to argue, but she said it with the flatness of someone reporting facts, not guessing. She'd been here 14 months. She knew the patterns better than I did. Why the bus stop specifically? I asked. My mother stirred her oatmeal. When your father was in the hospital, at the end, he told me something. He said people wait at bus stops because they believe something is coming to take them where they need to go. He said that's what faith looks like. Not praying in a church, waiting at a stop. Dad was on a lot of morphine at the end. He was. He was also right. She looked at me. I couldn't control whether you were alive or dead. I couldn't send a message. I couldn't look for you. The only thing I could do was be somewhere visible, somewhere you'd recognize, and wait. So I did. For 3 months. Every day. I ate my oatmeal and didn't argue further because there's a point in a conversation with my mother where resistance becomes cruelty. And I wasn't cruel enough to tell her that the odds had been astronomical, that I could have died 100 times over, that her faith was statistically unjustifiable. She knew all of that. She'd sat there anyway. Dana came down with Eli around 7. Eli was more animated this morning. He showed me his drawing from last night, a new one, this time featuring what appeared to be a man with a backpack approaching a house. "That's you," he said, pointing to the backpack man. "Coming home." "Good likeness," I said. He almost smiled. Almost. Dana had a routine, and she moved through it without inviting me in. Check the perimeter. Check the rain barrels. Check the boards on the windows. Inventory the supplies used the previous day. It was military in its precision, and I realized she'd built this system alone, through trial and error, through the kind of education that doesn't come with a diploma. "Let me help," I said, following her to the front porch. "With what?" "Whatever you need." She handed me a pair of binoculars. "East side. Every morning I check from the 2nd floor. Count what you can see. If the number changes significantly, we need to know." I went upstairs. The 2nd floor windows on the east side had been left unboarded. Observation points. I raised the binoculars and scanned the rooftops and streets of the east side of Hargrove. I counted 19 infected visible from my position, some standing still in yards, some visible through windows, 2 walking slowly down a residential street in the same direction, like a memory of pedestrians, 1 sitting on a porch step, rocking slightly. When I came back down and reported the count, Dana nodded. "That's normal. If it drops below 10, it means they've moved somewhere we can't see, and that's worse. If it goes above 30, it means something's drawn more in from outside town." "You've been doing this every day?" "Every single day, Marcus." There was no accusation in her voice this time, just fact. Just the quiet, immovable weight of everything she'd done while I was somewhere else. By the end of my 2nd day, I understood the architecture of their survival. Dana had built it, but my mother was the infrastructure beneath it, the person who kept Eli stable, who maintained the emotional regularity that kept a child from coming apart at the edges. They had a schedule. Wake at 6:30, breakfast by 7, perimeter check, observation count. Morning was for maintenance, repairs, water treatment, organizing supplies. Midday was for Eli's education. My mother taught him reading and arithmetic, from a collection of old textbooks she'd pulled from the elementary school before the east side became impassable. Afternoon was for scavenging, when needed, always in pairs, always before dark. And every afternoon from 3 to 5, my mother sat at the bus stop. Dana had hated it from the beginning. I could tell from the way she talked about it, like a policy she'd voted against but was forced to implement. But she'd gone along because their mother insisted, and because taking that ritual away would have broken something in the older woman that Dana didn't want to be responsible for breaking. On the third day, I went with Dana on a supply run to a house 4 blocks west. She carried a crowbar and moved with a silence that impressed me. I'd learned to be quiet on the road, but Dana had learned to be invisible, which is different and harder. The house had been partially looted but still held useful items. A drawer of batteries, a medicine cabinet with ibuprofen and antibiotic ointment, 3 cans of tuna fish behind a fallen shelf. Dana cataloged everything mentally as she went, touching each item once, deciding in seconds whether it had value. "You're good at this," I said. I didn't have a choice. Still. She paused over a closet and pulled out a heavy wool blanket, inspected it for mildew, folded it over her arm. The first month was the worst. We didn't know anything. The news stopped before it told us what to actually do. I made every mistake. Left doors unlocked, made too much noise, tried to signal a helicopter that turned out to be military and didn't stop. Eli got sick in week 3. Stomach virus, not the infection. But I didn't know that for 2 days. 2 days of thinking my son. She stopped, refolded the blanket that was already folded. I learned fast after that. We finished the house and moved to the next one. On the porch, Dana held up her hand, the universal stop signal. She pointed at the front door, which was slightly ajar, and we both listened. Nothing. But nothing doesn't mean empty. I'd learned that in Ohio. Dana pushed the door open with the crowbar, slow, controlled. The hallway was dark. We waited. 30 seconds, a minute. A sound, faint, rhythmic, a kind of scraping. "Upstairs," Dana mouthed. We could have left, should have left. There was no supply worth the risk. But Dana was already evaluating, her eyes tracing the ground floor for anything worth the danger. "Kitchen," she whispered. "Quick." We moved fast and silent. The kitchen had a pantry with the door still closed, and behind it, an untouched shelf. Canned beans, canned corn, a jar of peanut butter, a box of pasta. Jackpot by current standards. We loaded what we could carry. The scraping upstairs continued. Steady, mechanical. And infected, probably, moving against a wall or furniture in the same repetitive motion. They do that. Get stuck in a loop. It can last days. We were at the front door when the scraping stopped. Dana and I looked at each other. In the silence, I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Could hear the rain outside. Could hear Hargrove being quiet the way only dead towns can. Then the scraping resumed. We left. We didn't run. Dana doesn't run unless there's no alternative, because running makes noise and noise compounds. Back at the house, we sorted the haul in silence. Eli lined up the cans by size on the shelf. My mother noted each item in a notebook she'd been keeping since the beginning. A running inventory, dates of acquisition, estimated caloric values written in her careful, school-teacher-adjacent handwriting. "We need to talk about something," Dana said when Eli was upstairs for his afternoon rest. My mother looked up from the notebook. "Frank Harper came by this morning while you were upstairs," Dana said to me. "He says there's movement on Route 9, people, a group, he thinks, maybe a dozen." "Coming toward town?" I asked. He couldn't tell. He saw them from the ridge. They were moving east along the highway, could pass us by, could turn south. If they turn south, they come right through Hargrove. I know. My mother closed the notebook. People aren't always a threat. People are always a threat, Dana said, until they prove otherwise. Frank Harper came to our door the next morning. He was 63, barrel-chested, with a white beard that had gone untrimmed long enough to reach his sternum. Before the collapse, he'd been a carpenter, the kind of man who owned tools that had belonged to his grandfather and treated them with more reverence than most people treat heirlooms. His daughter Nola was 28, quiet in a way that felt less like shyness and more like a decision she'd made and stuck with. They stood on our porch with the careful posture of people who'd come to share bad news and weren't sure how to start. The group on Route 9 turned south last night, Frank said. Nola spotted their fires from the water tower. How many fires? Dana asked. 3, close together, maybe a quarter-mile north of the interchange. The interchange was where Route 9 crossed the county road that led directly into Hargrove's north end. If they kept moving south, they'd hit town by evening. Armed? I asked. Frank shrugged. Couldn't see that kind of detail. But 12 people traveling together this long into things. They're not doing it by being polite. Nola spoke for the first time. There were vehicles, at least 2. Trucks, I think. You don't keep trucks running unless you've got fuel supply. And you don't have fuel supply unless you've been taking it from somewhere. Her voice was flat and precise, like she'd rehearsed the observation and was delivering it as evidence. I liked her immediately. Not warmth, but reliability. In this world, reliability outranks warmth by a considerable margin. Options, Dana said. She was already in operational mode, standing with her weight evenly distributed, crowbar leaning against the porch rail within arm's reach. I'd been thinking about this since the previous afternoon, turning it over the way you turn a problem when you can't afford to get the answer wrong. We can hide, board up, go silent, hope they pass through or don't come this far. We can make contact, go to them, find out what they want, establish terms, or we can leave. We're not leaving, my mother said. Mom, this is our home, Marcus. I sat at that bus stop for 3 months waiting for you. I am not leaving. Dana, to my surprise, didn't argue. She's right. We leave. We lose everything we've built. And where do we go? Pittsburgh? There's nothing there. I heard the broadcasts before they stopped. Then we choose between hiding and contact, I said. Frank rubbed his beard. Hiding's a gamble. If they come into town and find the houses on this side stocked while the east side's picked clean and crawling, they'll know someone's here. They'll look harder. Contact's also a gamble, Dana said. Everything's a gamble, Frank replied. I'm just saying which gamble I'd put money on. We debated for another 20 minutes, and the decision we reached was a compromise that satisfied no one. Which is how you know it's probably the right call. Frank, Nola, and I would go north to intercept the group before they reached town. Dana would stay with my mother and Eli, packed and ready to move to the fallback position Dana had prepared months ago, a root cellar beneath an abandoned farmhouse half a mile south. If we're not back by dark, I said to Donna, go to the cellar. I know the protocol, Marcus. I'm not giving you the protocol. I'm asking you. Something shifted in her expression. Not softening, exactly. Recognition. She nodded. Eli watched us leave from the upstairs window. I saw his face in the glass, pale and round, his hand raised in a wave that was really a question. I waved back and hoped the answer was yes. We took the county road north, staying on the shoulder where the overgrown grass muffled our steps. Frank moved well for his size and age. Steady, unhurried, conserving energy the way experienced outdoorsmen do. Nola walked point, 20 yards ahead, stopping at intervals to listen. At the interchange, we found the remains of their campfires. 3 circles of scorched ground, still warm. Food wrappers, boot prints in the mud, a lot of boot prints. They moved this morning, Nola said, crouching by the freshest tracks. South, just like we thought. How far ahead? She stood and shaded her eyes, looking down the county road toward Hargrove. If they're on foot with vehicles, they could be in town already. The 3 of us started moving faster. We heard them before we saw them. Voices, actual human voices at conversational volume, which either meant they didn't know about the infected or didn't care. Both possibilities were concerning. They were on Main Street. 2 pickup trucks, both mud-caked, parked in front of Reba's diner. People were moving in and out of the buildings, carrying items. 7 visible. The rest presumably were inside. From our position behind the pharmacy on the corner of Main and Oak, I could make out details. They were organized. 2 people stood watch, 1 on each truck bed, scanning the street in opposite directions. The others moved with purpose, not panic. They'd done this before. They were scavenging Hargrove the same way we'd been scavenging it, only faster and less carefully. They're clearing the storefronts, Frank muttered, taking everything. I watched one of them exit the hardware store carrying an armful of tools. Another came out of the pharmacy, our pharmacy, the one we'd been slowly working through for medical supplies, with a box that probably held whatever we hadn't gotten to yet. If they find the houses on the west side stocked, they'll know, Nola said. They'll start searching. We needed to talk to them. Every minute we waited was a minute they got closer to finding evidence of our presence. I'll go, I said. Frank grabbed my arm. You don't know what they are. I know what happens if we wait. I stepped onto Main Street with my hands visible, palms out, walking at a pace that said, I'm not a threat, and I'm not afraid, and both statements were half-truths. The watchers spotted me immediately. One of them, a woman with short red hair and a rifle slung across her chest, called out to someone inside the diner. Within 30 seconds, there were 4 of them facing me, and a man stepped forward from the group. He was maybe 45, lean, dark skin, close-cropped hair going gray at the temples. He wore a canvas jacket and carried no visible weapon, which either meant he was unarmed or didn't need to display his weapon to feel secure. He walked toward me with his hands in his pockets, which was either disarming or reckless. Afternoon, he said, stopping about 10 feet away. You live here? I do now. How many? The directness of the question told me a lot. No pretense, no social warmth. He wanted information. Enough, I said. He studied me. You look like you've been on the road. Recently arrived. From where? West. That narrows it down. He almost smiled. I'm Colton. I lead this group. We're passing through, looking for supplies, not trouble. Then we've got common ground. We're also not looking for trouble. Good. Then here's what I propose. We take what's on Main Street, the commercial buildings. We don't touch the residential areas. We're gone by morning. Everybody keeps what they've got. It was a reasonable offer. More reasonable than I'd expected. But reason doesn't account for everything. And I'd learned that the most dangerous moment in any negotiation is when you believe you've reached an agreement. I need to discuss it with my people, I said. Fair enough. We'll be here. I walked back to Frank and Nola. My hands were shaking, but I kept them at my sides where no one could see. What do you think? Frank asked. I think he's telling the truth about passing through. don't think he's telling the truth about not touching residential. Nola nodded slowly. The way they're working the buildings, that's not a group that leaves anything behind voluntarily. We were standing at the edge of a decision that would define everything that came after. And the worst part was that there was no right answer. Let them take Main Street and hope they leave? Refuse and risk confrontation with a group that outnumbered us 4-1? Run and abandon everything. We let them have Main Street, I said. But tonight, we watch. And if they move toward the houses, we have a plan. What plan? Frank asked. I looked east, toward the part of Hargrove we'd all been avoiding. One they won't expect. We returned to the house, and I laid it out for Dana and my mother. Dana listened without interrupting, which was how I knew she was taking it seriously. Dana interrupts when she disagrees, but goes silent when she's calculating. The east side, she said when I finished. You want to use the infected. Not use, redirect. If Colton's people move into the residential blocks, they'll be making noise. If we open the corridor between east and west, clear the barriers on Sycamore and 3rd, the infected will follow the sound. They won't distinguish between us and them, my mother said. No, they won't, which is why we need to be somewhere else when it happens. The plan was ugly. I knew it was ugly while I was explaining it. We would be weaponizing the infected against living people. People who might keep their word and leave peacefully. People who had families too, probably. People who were doing what everyone was doing, trying to survive. But there's a math to survival that doesn't care about morality. 12 people with trucks and rifles could take everything we had. They could take more than supplies. I'd seen what happens when organized groups encounter small, vulnerable households. Not always, not inevitably, but enough. We only trigger it if they break the agreement, I said. If they stay on Main Street and leave in the morning, we do nothing. Dana went to the window. She stood there for a long time, looking out at the gray afternoon. Eli can't be here for this, she said. If it goes wrong, if the infected come this direction, he can't be here. The cellar, I said. You take him tonight. Stay there regardless. And leave you and Mom. I'll be with Frank and Nola. Mom goes with you. I am not going to the cellar, my mother said. She said it the way she said things that were final, without emphasis, without volume, just a flat statement that existed as fact. Mom, please. I waited 3 months for you, Marcus. I'm not hiding in a hole in the ground. Dana and I looked at each other. And in that look was every negotiation we'd ever had about our mother. Every argument about doctor's appointments and diet and the stairs being too steep and the car being too old. Some things don't change, even when everything else does. Fine, Donna said. Eli and I go to the cellar. You 3 watch from the house. If it goes bad, you run south. You don't play hero. You run. Agreed. That evening, I watched from the 2nd floor as Colton's group made camp on Main Street. They'd moved the trucks nose to nose to create a windbreak and set up in the space between them. A cook fire, voices and occasional laughter. They posted guards, the same watchers as before, rotating positions. They looked like people. They sounded like people. If I'd met them at the wheeling camp, I might have shared a meal with them. The world doesn't sort its threats into categories you can see from a distance. At 9 o'clock, the camp went mostly quiet. At 10, the guards changed. At 11, a pair broke from the camp and started walking west along Main Street. Toward the residential blocks, Frank was watching from the Harper house on Birch Street. We'd set up a signal, a flashlight, 2 blinks, if anyone moved west. I saw the blinks from my position on the 2nd floor. My stomach dropped. Not because I was surprised, because I'd hoped. The pair moved carefully, one with a flashlight, one with something long in their hands, a rifle or a shotgun. They stopped at the first house on the west side of Maine, the old Morrison place. Tried the door, found it locked, moved to the next one. They were scouting, seeing which houses were occupied, which were accessible, which were worth hitting. They'd take Main Street first and the residential blocks tomorrow, or the day after, or whenever they decided they wanted more. I went downstairs. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, her hands folded, listening. "They're moving west," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do what you need to do." I went out the back door and crossed 2 yards in the dark to reach Sycamore Street. The barriers were crude, overturned cars, piled furniture, dumpsters dragged across intersections. Donna had placed them months ago to create a buffer zone between the infected east side and the livable west side. Frank and Nola met me at the intersection of Sycamore and 3rd. Nobody spoke. We moved to the first barrier, a delivery van parked sideways across the road, wedged between 2 houses. It took the 3 of us 10 minutes to rock it free. The scraping of metal on asphalt was the loudest sound I'd made in weeks, and my body reacted to it with a full surge of adrenaline that made my hands shake and my vision sharpen. We opened 2 more gaps on parallel streets. Then we retreated west, fast, to the house. And then we waited for the sound to carry. It didn't take long. The first sign was the dogs. I hadn't noticed stray dogs in Hargrove. They must have been keeping to the outskirts, the way animals do when predators occupy the center. But they started barking from somewhere south, a rolling chain of alarm calls that spread through the darkness like a fuse burning. Then the infected began to move. From the 2nd floor, I watched with the binoculars as shapes emerged from the gap on Sycamore. Slow at first. The still ones need time to transition. They go from motionless to aware to mobile in stages, like a machine warming up. 1 figure, then 2, then a group of 5 moving together in the loose, hitching gait that means they've locked onto a stimulus. The sound from Main Street. Colton scouts, rattling doors, their footsteps, maybe their voices. Even a whisper carries wrong in a dead town at night. I couldn't see what happened next. Main Street was 3 blocks east of my position, and the angle was wrong. But I heard it. First a shout, sharp, male, cut off. Then a second voice, louder. "Contact! Contact!" The word sounded military. A gunshot, then 2 more. Then a sustained burst that could only be automatic fire. And I realized one of them had a weapon I hadn't counted on. The automatic fire would draw more. That was the thing about the plan. Once it started, it didn't stop. Sound breeds response. Response breeds more sound. The feedback loop is what makes infected swarms so devastating. Every shot fired to stop them summons more. My mother appeared behind me. "Marcus, stay downstairs." "How bad?" I didn't answer because I didn't know, and because lying to her would have cost something I couldn't afford. She went back downstairs, and I heard her doing something in the kitchen, moving things, packing. She was preparing to run. Smart. She'd survived this long by being smarter than I gave her credit for. The gunfire on Main Street became intermittent. Bursts, then silence, then single shots. I heard an engine start, one of the trucks. Headlights swung across the buildings, throwing wild shadows. The truck moved, accelerating hard. Then a crash, metal on metal, and the headlights went sideways and stopped. More shapes coming through the gaps on Sycamore. A steady stream now, 10, 15, some moving fast. The fast ones terrified me more than anything else in this world, because the fast ones still have some kind of muscular coordination, which means whatever's left of them is newer, fresher, closer to what they used to be. A figure stumbled across the yard, 2 houses down from ours. I couldn't tell if it was infected or human. It moved in a crouch, fast, and disappeared between the houses. Then another figure followed. And this one I could tell. The gait was wrong, the head angle was wrong. And it moved with that terrible single-mindedness that living people can't replicate. I went downstairs. We need to go, now. My mother already had a bag packed. She was standing by the back door with a kerosene lamp unlit in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. The kitchen knife almost broke me. My mother, who used to apologize to spiders before she scooped them into a cup to carry outside, standing in the dark with a knife. "Frank and Nola?" she asked. "They know the plan. South to the cellar." We went out the back. The night was cold and wet and loud, with sounds that shouldn't exist. The screaming on Main Street, the gunfire that was thinning now, a car alarm that had somehow been triggered and added its mechanical wail to the chaos. I led my mother through 3 backyards, keeping low, moving as fast as her hip would allow. She didn't complain. She didn't slow down more than she had to. At the edge of the last yard, before the open field that led to the farmhouse, I stopped and listened. The field was dark. 1/2 mile of open ground. If anything was in it, we wouldn't see it until we were close. "Stay behind me," I said. "Step where I step." We went into the field. The dead soybean stalks crunched under our feet no matter how carefully we moved. And every sound felt like a flare sent up into the darkness. My mother's breathing was hard, but controlled. She'd taken a handful of ibuprofen before we left. I'd seen her do it. And the bad hip was moving better than it had any right to. Halfway across the field, I heard something behind us. Not a footstep, a vocalization. Low, sustained, coming from the direction we'd left. I didn't look back. Looking back costs time and balance, and you can't outrun them anyway. So the only thing that matters is whether they're close enough for it to matter. My mother heard it too. Her hand found my arm, her grip stronger than I expected. "Keep moving," I said. The farmhouse materialized from the darkness like a photograph developing. Old white clapboard, sagging porch, the cellar doors set into the ground beside the foundation. Dana had left them unlocked. I pulled the doors open. Dana's face appeared from below, illuminated by a candle. Eli was behind her, wrapped in a blanket, his eyes like moons. "Get in," Dana said. I helped my mother down the steps. Then I turned to look back across the field. In the distance, Hargrove was lit by firelight. One of the trucks was burning. The glow painted the underside of the clouds orange, and against it I could see silhouettes moving on the town's edge. Too far away to identify, too many to count. I went down into the cellar and pulled the doors closed above us. The cellar was 8 feet by 12, dirt-floored, with wooden shelves on 2 walls stocked with water jugs, canned food, and a first aid kit. Dana had prepared it as a fallback months ago. There was a chemical toilet behind a hanging blanket, 3 sleeping bags, and enough supplies for a week, maybe 10 days if we stretched. 5 of us in a space meant for 3. Frank and Nola arrived 20 minutes after us, coming through the field from a different angle. Nola had a cut on her forehead. She'd walked into a fence post in the dark. And Frank was breathing hard enough that my mother made him sit down and put his head between his knees. Eli hadn't spoken since we arrived. He sat in Dana's lap with the blanket pulled up to his chin, watching the adults with the unreadable patience of a child who has learned that panic is for people who still believe the world can be fixed. "What happened on Main Street?" Dana asked. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the current underneath. "The scouts moved west. We opened the barriers. The infected came through." "And Colton's group?" "I don't know. I heard gunfire. One truck crashed. The other might have gotten out." Dana processed this. I could see her running the calculations, what the aftermath meant for our supplies, our position, our safety. If any of them survived and they figure out what happened, I know. They'll come looking for us. "I know, Dana." Silence settled in the cellar. The candle flickered. Above us, muffled by earth and wood, the sounds from Hargrove continued, faint, irregular, like a storm that hadn't finished passing. "Did we kill them?" Nola asked. She asked it simply, without inflection. But the question expanded in the small space until it touched all of us. "We gave the infected a direction," I said. "The infected did the rest." "That's the same thing." I didn't argue because she was right, and because arguing the distinction was something I'd seen people do at the wheeling camp. Parsing the moral difference between pulling a trigger and removing a safety barrier. The math is the same. The dead are the same. Frank spoke from his corner, still breathless. "They were going to take everything. You saw the scouts." "I saw 2 people checking doors." "Nola, I'm not saying we were wrong. I'm saying we should know what it was." Nobody answered. Eli shifted in Dana's lap and pulled the blanket higher. My mother sat against the wall with her eyes closed, and I couldn't tell if she was sleeping or praying or just absent, gone to wherever she went when the world asked too much. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the cellar doors with a tire iron across my knees and listened to the field above us. The sounds from town faded gradually. By 3 in the morning, there was nothing, just wind and rain and the settling of the old farmhouse above. At first light, I opened the cellar doors an inch and looked out. The field was empty. The sky was the color of old pewter. In the distance, smoke still rose from Hargrove, thin and vertical in the windless morning. "I'll go look," I said. "Not alone," Dana said immediately. "Someone needs to stay with Eli and Mom." "Frank stays. Nola and I go." I wanted to argue and didn't. She'd earned the right to make tactical decisions, and she knew the terrain better than I did. The 3 of us crossed the field in the gray morning, spaced 10 yards apart, moving in the careful, watchful way that becomes automatic after enough months. The soybean stalks were flattened in places. Passage trails from the night before, though whether human or infected, I couldn't tell. We entered Hargrove from the south, the opposite direction from the action, and worked our way through the residential blocks. The west side was mostly untouched. A window broken here, a fence knocked down there, but the houses were intact. My mother's house was fine. The back door stood open the way I'd left it, and the supplies inside were undisturbed. Dana went through each room, checking, cataloging, confirming. Everything where we'd left it. The sight of Eli's drawings still on the kitchen table, the man with the backpack, the house with the tall fence, twisted something behind my ribs. Main Street was different. One pickup truck sat crumpled against the front of the post office, the cab crushed, the windshield gone. The other was burned to its frame, still smoking. Debris was scattered across the entire block. Dropped supplies, torn clothing, a boot, a backpack with its contents spilling out. And bodies. I counted 11. Some were Colton's people, I recognized the red-haired woman, lying face down near the diner. I didn't look at the details. The others were infected, dropped by gunfire but still displaying the marbling, the distended features, the wrongness that tells you the body was empty before the bullet stopped it. I didn't see Colton. 11, Dana said, doing her own count. He said 12 in the group. Could be one inside a building. Could be one who ran. Could be one who's going to come back. We searched the trucks. The burned one had nothing. The crashed one yielded a duffel bag in the truck bed that held ammunition, 9mm and .223, along with a water filter, a solar charger, and a folded map with routes marked in red ink. The routes led from somewhere in West Virginia, through Ohio, and into Pennsylvania. Hargrove was circled. They knew about this town specifically, Nola said, looking at the map. Everyone knew about every town, I said. You mark potential scavenging sites and hit them one by one. This isn't a potential. It's circled. Twice. I looked at the map again. She was right. Hargrove had a double circle and a notation in small handwriting I couldn't quite read. I tilted it toward the light. The notation said, 3+ child. Active residence, west side. Someone had scouted Hargrove before the main group arrived. Someone had seen my family. I showed Dana. She read it, and her jaw set in a way I recognized from childhood. The expression she wore when she crossed a threshold from uncertainty into something cold and absolute. They were coming for us, she said. The agreement was a stall. Maybe. Don't maybe me. 3+ child, active residence. They knew exactly where we were. They were going to clean out Main Street first and hit us second. I folded the map and put it in my pocket. The moral calculus I'd been struggling with since the cellars shifted. It didn't disappear. What we'd done was still what we'd done. But the gap between what we did and what would have happened if we hadn't narrowed to almost nothing. We gathered what we could carry from the crashed truck and left Main Street. Behind us, the bodies lay in the gray morning light, and the smoke from the burned truck drew a thin line into the sky that would be visible for miles. On the walk back, Dana spoke without looking at me. You made the right call. It was the first time she'd told me I was right about anything since I'd arrived, and it didn't feel the way I'd expected it to. 3 weeks passed. Hargrove settled into a new silence, not the absence of sound, but the specific quiet of a place that has absorbed a violent event and is still digesting it. We cleaned Main Street. Frank, Nola, and I spent 2 days moving the bodies to a lot behind the hardware store, where we burned them because burial takes time and energy and tools we couldn't spare, and because the infected bodies couldn't be buried safely anyway. The smoke rose for an afternoon, thick and dark, and none of us watched it for long. The barriers on Sycamore and 3rd had to be rebuilt. The infected who'd come through hadn't all returned east. Some were still wandering the west side, disoriented, following walls and fences in their aimless, mechanical patterns. We dealt with them individually over the course of a week, leading them back toward the east side using noise, tapping on metal, banging pots, like herding cattle made of nightmares. Dana's morning count from the 2nd floor stabilized at 22. Higher than before, but consistent. The new ones had come from outside town, drawn by the gunfire and the fire, and settled into the east side's vacant houses, like water finding its level. My mother resumed her afternoon vigil at the bus stop. I asked her to stop. I told her I was here now, that the waiting was over. She smiled and said, "You're not the only person I'm waiting for." I didn't ask who else. There was no one else. Our family was small, and everyone we had was accounted for. But I understood that the bus stop had become something larger than its original purpose. It was her act of faith. Her statement that despite everything, she believed the world still moved toward reunion rather than scattering. Some afternoons I sat with her. We brought 4 chairs now. The 4th was for whoever came next, and nobody ever did. But the empty chair made its point. Eli began to talk more. Not to me specifically. The trust between us was building slowly, in increments measured by glances and proximity rather than conversation. But he talked more in general, narrating his drawings, asking questions about the world before. How big was the ocean? Were airplanes loud? What did a hamburger taste like? My mother answered with the patient specificity of someone building a museum in a child's mind, preserving things that might otherwise exist only as words. Dana and I found a working rhythm. She ran supply operations and perimeter security. I handled maintenance, water treatment, and the East Side observation count. We divided labor without discussing it, which was how I knew it was working. The decisions happened faster than the arguments could form. One evening, she found me on the back porch, watching the sun drop behind the tree line. She sat next to me and didn't speak for a while. The silence between us had changed texture since the night of the corridor. It was no longer adversarial. It was shared. "I was angry at you," she said, "for not being here." "I know. I was angry for about 8 months. Then I was just scared. Then I was too busy to be either." "You did something extraordinary, Dana, keeping them alive." "I did what was in front of me. That's not extraordinary. That's just not quitting." She pulled her knees up to her chest. "When Mom started the bus stop thing, I thought she'd lost it. I really did. I thought the stress had cracked something, and she was sitting out there waiting for a bus that would never come. And the metaphor was too perfect and too sad, and I should do something. But I couldn't take it away from her. It was the only thing she did that wasn't about survival. It was about hope. And I didn't have any of that left to give her. She was right, though. She was right by accident, by luck, by whatever you want to call a 160-mile walk through hell that happened to end at the right place. She'd call it faith. I know what she'd call it." Dana paused. "I'm glad you're here, Marcus." She went inside before I could respond, and I sat on the porch and listened to the evening sounds. Birds, wind, the distant static of the infected murmuring in their houses on the east side. And underneath it all, the quieter sound of a household continuing. Eli's voice asking a question, my mother's voice answering, a pot being placed on a stove, a chair being pulled across a floor. The 12th person from Colton's group never appeared. I checked the roads weekly. I studied the map we'd found, learning the routes, identifying where the group had come from and where others might follow. The double circle around Hargrove haunted me. We'd been seen. We'd been marked. It had happened before and would happen again. But for now, the roads were empty. For now, the chairs at the bus stop held 3 people and 1 absence. And the absence was a door we kept open because closing it felt like giving up on the possibility that someone else was walking toward us through the ruins. Spring came in stages. First the mud, then the green, then the insects, then the problems that warm weather brings. Faster infected, spoiled food, the need for fresh water in larger quantities. But also, growing season. Dana and my mother expanded the raised beds. Nola Harper, it turned out, had studied agricultural science for 2 years before dropping out. And she redesigned our garden layout with a precision that made Dana look almost impressed. Frank built a rainwater collection system using gutters salvaged from abandoned houses, a gravity-fed network that channeled water into sealed barrels. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. And working was the only aesthetic that mattered. I began teaching Eli. Not school subjects, my mother had those covered. I taught him practical things. How to walk quietly, how to read a room before entering it, how to identify an infected by posture and movement before you're close enough for it to matter. He absorbed it with the seriousness of a child who understands that knowledge is the difference between breathing and not breathing. One afternoon he asked me, "Were you scared when you were walking here?" "Every day." "What did you do when you were scared?" I thought about it. I kept walking. He considered this for a while, the way children consider large ideas, with their whole face. Then he nodded, as if I'd confirmed something he already suspected about the world. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move through it. The man living in the feed store disappeared sometime in April. We never learned his name, never spoke to him, never knew his story. One day his cook fire was cold, and his belongings were gone. People still moved through the world, invisible, solitary, following routes only they understood. I thought about him more than I should have. Another ghost on the periphery. In late May, Dana made a decision. She took down the boards on the ground floor windows facing west, just the west side, where sight lines were clear and the afternoon sun came through. The light changed the house. It made the interior visible and the exterior present. And it meant that anyone approaching from the west would see a home instead of a fortress. "People need to see a light on," she said. "Otherwise they walk past." My mother didn't comment. She just moved her chair from the bus stop to the front porch every afternoon. And when the light came through the unboarded windows and spilled across the yard, she sat in it and waited. Not for me, I was already there. For whoever was next. For the possibility that hadn't arrived yet but might, any day, any afternoon, between 3 and 5. I joined her most days. Frank and Nola sometimes. Eli always with his pencils and his envelope paper, drawing houses with tall fences and suns that filled a quarter of the sky. One day, I asked Eli why he always drew the sun so big. "Because it's the biggest thing," he said. He wasn't wrong. And he wasn't just talking about the sun. I think about the bus stop. I think about it more than the walk, more than the corridor, more than the bodies on Main Street or the cellar in the dark, or the field crossing with my mother's hand on my arm. I think about 3 chairs arranged under a rusted sign for a service that had been discontinued years before any of this happened. I think about my mother sitting there in the cold, day after day, watching an empty road. Not because it was rational, not because the odds were in her favor, because she decided to believe that the world still had a direction, and the direction was toward each other. That's what survival is, I think. Not the water tablets or the perimeter checks or the east side count. Those are mechanics. Survival is the decision to remain findable, to stay where someone might look for you, to keep a chair empty because someone might need to sit down. I don't know what comes next. The infected aren't going away. The east side of Hargrove still murmurs at night. There will be more groups on Route 9, more double circles on someone's map. The world will keep testing the distance between what we're willing to do and who we want to be when it's over. But there's a porch with afternoon light, and a boy drawing the sun, and a woman who waited 3 months at a bus stop that had been closed for years because she believed her son was coming home. He was. I was.